When did you first come to Argenta?
May 10th, 1952.
From where?
Walker's Landing.
Walker's Landing, BC?
Down the lake, now where the ashram is. We'd been staying there. Actually, we crossed the border coming out from California on April 1st, April Fool's Day, and from April 1st until May 10th, we stayed at Walker's Landing with with Bobby and Dorothy Brown.
Who were they?
Well, they're a couple who now live at Creston. He was a gardener who lived at Kootenai Bay. He and his wife, Dorothy, had come to Kootenai Bay more than 20 years before 52 from England, and had carved out this home in the bush and raised two girls. They were Quakers, members of Vancouver meeting, but I don't think they'd ever been to Vancouver. If they had, more than maybe once, and all their Quakerism was carried on by correspondence. We heard about them and corresponded with them because he used to have a nursery service. The way they made their living was with a nursery service. They had greenhouses, and he raised plants, potting plants, potted plants for house plants and trees, shrubs, and then plants started like to sit out in your garden. And he had a boat that he'd go up and down the lake here, and stopped in at all the little places along the lake, taking orders one trip, and then other trips delivering the plants. He's now down at Creston. They're retired. He was the gardener for the Creston Hospital for quite a while.
Is his wife still alive too?
Yes. It's Graham and Dorothy Brown. Only everybody knows him as Bobby Brown. And he told us about Argenta, and he recommended Argenta as being a really possible place. See, we stayed at Walker's Landing from April 1st until May 10th, and during that time, John and George Pollard first. George and the Pollards came up with us, and John and George Pollard circled around all the places around Walker's Landing, around Kootenai Bay and Crawford Bay and all that whole area, looking to see if there's land available or anything that might be usable. And then, after about 2 weeks of that, Bob Boyd and John Rush and Charlie Boyd came up from California, and the four men, and by that time Ted Pollard was here. So Ted and Charlie, who were junior high age, and Bob and John and George and John just went all through the West Kootenays, because by that time we decided the West Kootenays was pretty much where we wanted to settle.
What were some of the other places you thought about?
Well, we considered Oregon, and because we knew we did not want to stay in the California culture, but Oregon at that time was pretty cooperatively oriented, and land was reasonable, and there were a lot of people we knew there who were into many of the same ideologies we were into, and there wasn't a loyalty oath. The Oregon government was very much opposed to the idea of loyalty oaths, or quite opposed. And it wasn't as much more rural-oriented, Oregon was. So we considered that. Before that, we considered Costa Rica. And at one stage, John and I had a letter written saying if we opened, we were ready to move to Costa Rica. And we put it in a little box by the door to take it down to the mailbox. And after a week we suddenly looked at it and realized that we hadn't taken its mailbox, and decided that if we hadn't taken the mailbox, then we really didn't want to go that much and weren't ready. So we burned the letter. But the Boyds and we, Rushes, were thinking about Costa Rica quite seriously. And then Oregon, and And then we investigated the Okanagan. There were the Elmo Wolf and a group of people who were involved with the Tillotsons in a cooperative in Modesto and Elmo. A group of them made a trip up and visited in the Slocan, well, actually, the Arrow Lakes area, which I'm sure glad we didn't settle there because it's underwater now. And we thought about that, and we thought about the Slocan. Then I was involved in another trip that came up, looking to see whether or not this is a great place to move. David Stevenson and I came up with another group, and we got as far up this lake as 6 Mile. But we didn't come any farther at that time. And that was about a year before we moved up here.
And that was in 1951?
Uh-huh.
What group was that? Other friends in California?
There was a group of us, mostly Quaker, but not all, there were just a lot of us in that area who were involved in cooperative movements, who were involved in interracial things, but had decided that well, as Toynbee says, you know how Toynbee describes civilizations rise, and as long as they're healthy, and then there's sort of a plateau, and then over the brink, and it would take a miracle to bring them back to any further life. Just as we'd come to feel that there were enough things that were destructive of true democracy and the non-materialistic values for our culture. There are enough of those happening in the States that it would take a miracle to bring it back to something that we felt comfortable about being part of. And so we were looking for some place where we could be more comfortable in terms of the political scene. Much the same as a lot of people have moved from the United States recently, but this is in the 50s, and not many people were thinking those terms then. Also, another thing was that we were trying, the Boyds and we and the Rushes were trying to, in our own inimitable way, to live by our values, those values that we espoused. And we just recognized that there were too many grays in terms of right and wrong in California where we were to be able to, for us to be able to distinguish. And we wanted to be someplace where there was a more organic relationship with the soil and where rights and wrongs were clear.
So you'd come up here in 1951, and then you came up again in 1950.
Well, David Stevenson and I came with another group, just like Elmo came with a group from Modesto the year before. And there were just a number of people from San Francisco were coming up, another cooperative group we knew in Marin County in San Francisco, had come up, and they ended up at Smithers with a cooperative group about the same time we came up. So it was there was a foment in the Bay Area and Southern California of people not being easy with what was happening. It was pre-McCarthy, but the handwriting was on the wall.
So you came to Walker's Landing and you looked around, and how did you actually come to Argenta? This fellow, Graham Brown, suggested it.
Bobby Brown suggested it. And you ought to get this story from John because he came up. Mary Pollard and I were staying at Walker's Landing, and we had, Donnie Pollard was 3, and Tommy Stevenson was 4, and Dick was 7, and David and Janet were 6. Our twins were 6. And we had all our cats and dogs and these families of kids. And so Mary and I pretty much stayed at Walker's Landing. We went on a couple of trips, but we didn't come over here. We went on one trip over to Fauquier. But by and large, we stayed there, and I taught the kids that were school age some schoolwork, and there was a German family staying at the Browns at the same time. They had some little cabins that are around. If you've been to the ashram, you know there's a bunch of little houses around, and most of those the Browns had built for various reasons. And one of these had a German couple who didn't speak any English, who were working at the mine. He was working at the mine, and they had kids. And so I was teaching them some English, and Dick Pollard some second grade stuff, and David and Janet some first grade stuff, and we had a little school every morning.
You were a professional school teacher, weren't you?
Yes, I had taught 3 years and gotten with my California certification for high school, and then I'd been involved in starting Pacific Ackworth, and was the continuity teacher there for the first 3 years of Pacific Ackworth Friends School, which is an elementary school in Southern California. And then we had been part of the group of people who had thought in terms of starting a Friends High School in Tracy, in California. But that was another one of the things that we just couldn't see how the school laws were such that we couldn't see how we could make, do the things we wanted to do with a school and still be within the limits of school law in California at that time. Oh, just
building codes and that sort of stuff.
Right. How'd you guess it? One of the things that really finally stopped us were a lot of things, but one of the things that finally stopped us was the fact that you had to have a huge door on any building that children were going into, and all kinds of panic bars and locks, just a whole bunch of things that were required by law. And then the political things. Remember, it was a pre-McCarthy period, and the political scene was mucky, and the California Loyalty Oath had already gone through the Levering Act, and we'd not signed that, and were considered communist by many of the people in the area, and some of them didn't want to do business with us because they just weren't sure about these communist people.
When did you first step foot in Argenta?
Yeah. May 10th. We came up on the Grant Hall. The Morier was being repaired, and we came in on the Grant Hall.
I've never heard of that. Was that a forestry?
It was a tug. It was the tug that brought up the cars when it was a pretty good sized tug that brought up the cars, the railway cars, when the Morier was being repaired.
And you landed down at the wharf here? Did you know where you were going to stay then? You had already made
what happened was that, see, Bob and John Rush had come up here. At that time, you came in one Saturday and went out the next. And they didn't want to do that. So what they did was they got the boat to put in here first and let them off so they could look around Argenta. And then the boat went over to Lardo and did its business and came back to pick the guys up here. And so they had the length of time that it took to go over and come back. But they were able to look at this piece of property. Is my shaking this bothering this? Well, they were able to look at this piece of property, this little wharf piece. And at that time, Bob Tarr wanted to sell it because his wife had died in 48, and he had not been well the previous year, and he wanted to sell it. And but we didn't want to buy it at that point, so we rented for the first year with the idea that we could buy later on if we wanted to. And so we moved into the hotel. I mean, we came with the idea that we would be moving into the hotel, and the Pollards would be moving into the cabin. And we didn't know anything beyond that. We just came.
What about the Boyds and the Rushes?
The Boyds were still down in California because Bob had tomatoes to harvest. And I guess it wasn't tomatoes to harvest. You can get that from Ruth, but he had farming things he had to finish up because they came up in August, and he wouldn't have harvested tomatoes by then. And the Rushes had been part of our group in Tracy, but they had John had a good job, paying job, and it wasn't, he hadn't had to sign a loyalty oath or anything. So he was staying for another year and earning that much more money, so he'd have that much more money to come with. And so they came in the next year.
Was Bob Tarr living alone, or did he have his family?
He had Lloyd and Marion, who were the youngest two kids, who had been living with him. But that was another reason he was ready to sell, was that they had left finally. They were high school age. They were junior high age when their mother died.
Was he living in the hotel?
Well, they had been living in the hotel, but when his wife died, she died of cancer, and it was she apparently was quite a powerful woman. And at the time she died, he just couldn't hack living there anymore. There was too many things reminded him, because he had just gone over, just a little while before that, he'd gone over and just redone the whole place, 2 or 3 years before that, and for her. And then the fact that she'd been stricken with cancer and died within a fairly short time of their being aware of it. He had just moved down to the cabin and had taken, when we came to the hotel, it was obviously an abandoned place where they had taken the linoleum off the floor and put it in the cabin. I mean, sections of it. And the things that they didn't want, they left up there. And like the upstairs of the hotel was, just had many, many gunny sacks of dirty clothes. Half worn out wool socks and wool pants and winter underwear and that sort of stuff that it just was, that the kids hadn't wanted to cope with, and because they didn't have washing machine or anything. So the hotel was really a deserted place. Did your tape run out?
No, that's fine.
Would you be willing to move those?
Did you plant the garden the first year, right away?
Being crazy Stevensons, of course. When we arrived on May 10th, we were met at, I should describe this, we were met as the Moyer came in. It was a once-a-week event, and this continued to happen for as long as the Moyer came in. Everybody in the community turns out, unless they're sick, down on the wharf to meet the Moyer, because it was, at that time, it was a lifeline for food, for visitors, for anything, and the mail. And then Mr. Begwin, Charlie Begwin, and Ruth would take the mail over to the old school, and everybody would stand around and wait and talk and just have a good social time, catch up on all the happenings of the community while they're waiting for the mail to be sorted. And so when we arrived, there were all these people meeting us, and they had heard that we were coming, so that George Begwin, who built the house that the Hawkins are in, was there, and before we'd been on the dock 5 minutes, he offered us a cow. He said he had a cow, for loan. That he had a cow, a Jersey cow, who was still in good, she was young and all, but he wasn't sure whether she had brucellosis or not, and he had to segregate her from the herd because he was shipping milk at the time. And all we would have to do is pasteurize the milk until we had a chance to.
Fever
right. Until we had a chance to get it tested. So we accepted right away because there was a barn here, and he brought the cow down within 24 hours. So we were set up with a cow. We also, crazy people that we were, we had ordered 100 baby chicks to arrive on the next Saturday's boat. Well, you can imagine, if you have a good enough imagination, John and I, in our early 30s, with a 4-year-old and twins who were 6, moving into a hotel where the ceiling paper was dropping off the ceiling, paper, but it was dropping down, and no stove. I mean, a stove that was there, but it wasn't much good. And moving into this place with our bedrolls and all. And then, see, Bob Boyd had brought all of our worldly goods in, along with a bunch of their stuff. When he'd come up to Walker's Landing, he had brought the big oak trailer, which you probably never saw, but it was a huge big trailer that had oak flooring. He'd put oak flooring down on the floor of it. And he pulled it with his 3/4-ton pickup. And it had somebody's farm equipment and just a whole bunch of motherboard stuff. Brought it up when he came up, and then he pulled it up to Caslow, and they put it on the Moyer, on the Moyer there, and it had come to Lardo. But the Grand Hall couldn't bring it in here. So it was over at Lardo, and the road couldn't come around anyway. So what George Pollard did with his big Chevy truck was to take running trips to go back to Lardo to get our stuff and bring it back, and the Pollard stuff.
Through Hauser.
Through Hauser, by way of Hauser, which was all just barely one car lane wide. So when that stuff came, all of the stuff, because we had packed, because we had no idea where we were going to be when we left California. It was completely a shot into the dark. We figured we probably would be in the West Kootenays. It was really it was one of the most, one of the best parts of my life, because we were operating completely on faith that it was the right thing to do. We burned all our bridges behind. We had $3,000, period. That was all we had, was $3,000 that we'd sold our place there for, which was, it was in a cooperative thing, and it wasn't very much, but we felt satisfied with it because we felt satisfied the people who bought it would fit in the co-op. And so that was what we had. And it was just such a free, open period of really trying to, Quakers have a saying about living as way opens. And it was really a period of living as way opens. I did have my my teacher certificate. I'd gotten my BC teacher certificate, my temporary one. I'd gotten that before we left California. But I didn't know whether I was going to use it or not. One of the bases that Bob Tarr was willing to rent us the place was that he had 2 batches of grandchildren in the community here who were on correspondence. And the fact
there were
Tars and Sozicks.
Oh, Tar's living up above it. Pete Tarr.
Pete and Kathleen. And then Arlene was coming along, and so he wanted, and the Begwin kids were on correspondence. So he realized that if we came in with our children and with a teacher, there was a very good chance the province would open the school, and that was a big talking point in terms of his being willing to rent us the place, even though he wanted to sell it. So when we arrived, we came in with our kids, and people were glad to see us because we had children and we were going to open the school.
Mm.
But we didn't know we were. I taught for a month before I even had any assurance I was a teacher and was going to get paid for it.
So you were warmly welcomed by everyone?
We were warmly welcomed. We got a cow, and the orchard was all in bloom, and the blanket of yellow dandelions beneath the cherries and the apple trees. I forget whether it was cherries or apples in blossom. I think it was apples at that time. It was just a beautiful, beautiful scene with a cow that we were given right away, and people were very friendly and very accepting and open. It was a very, very warm period.
Who lived here then? Well, who lived in...
All right.
Glenn live, or Seamarks live in... Glenn Seamark or Sozix live in the corner house?
Sozix lived in the little old house halfway up the hill to Glenn's. And in the house that Mr. and Mrs. Sozix, Billy Sozix and his wife, lived in the Sozix house.
They were both still alive then?
Oh, yes. And Mrs.
Gallus?
Mrs. Gallus and Glenn and Johnny Gallus. Johnny Gallus and his mother and Glenn were living in the place the Valentines are in.
Glenn was beyond school age by then, wasn't he?
Yeah, Glenn was on unemployment insurance. Well, I'm not sure at that time, but soon after he was on unemployment. He was doing, I think at the time we came here, he had a Jeep or Rover, no, I think it was a Jeep, that he was taking care of the mine, the Hamel Silver mine. He was watching over it. And he'd go up there periodically and check out, make sure that nobody was bothering it and everything was all right, and then come back. And he was paid a small salary for that. And then later on, he was laid off. And there was nobody in the house the Pollards, or the place the Pollards are in, that had been originally, the house there had been built for Jack Folkard's aunt, I believe. And that was the house the Pollards eventually bought, the 8 acres, and moved into, and it burned a couple years later. And the Begwins were living, Charlie Begwin and Ruth were living in their house.
From Pollards to Begwins, there was nothing? There was no one living in that area at all?
The wolf cabin was there, but horses and cows had been in it. And when it was time for the wolves to come, our family went up and spent a whole day shoveling horse manure and cow manure out and scrubbing. So when they arrived, they'd have a place to stay that was clean.
And then Tars beyond?
And then the Tars were beyond that. And there was nobody on this side of the road at all.
So that's it?
Yeah.
No one was in the Coleman place?
No.
So that's only 2, 4, 6 families in the entire community then?
Right. The Rushes moved into Coleman place when...
The next year?
Yeah, the next year. But the Pollards lived in the cabin May, June, July. And during that time, Mary and I used to meet on the path halfway between the hotel and the cabin, and because we had no idea what we're going to do to make a living, any of us. I might teach school, but that wasn't a surety. And we'd meet halfway up and halfway down along in the evening in the summertime, and we always end up by saying, if we could just live on the beauty of this place, there wouldn't be any problem. We would live very richly. But during that time also, they bought the 8 acres and moved up there eventually in time for the Boyds to move into the cabin in August. And the Boyds moved into the cabin in August. Before we came up, while we were still at Walker's Landing, see, the fellows had done visiting here.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary and I came absolutely on faith that the fellows had made a decision that was a good decision. But they'd found out that they could buy the Shetty place for $10 an acre, which was the 300 acres that the Boyds are on now. I can tell you where it is, but I'm not sure you want to know now. But it was 300 acres of land that we could buy for $10 an acre. Andy Shetty, who lived down Shetty's Bench, really wanted to sell it to somebody that would care for it and take care of it. And that was within our price class. And so at that time, we envisioned all of us eventually living out there.
Well, that's Pollard's, Rush's, Boyd's, and yourself?
Well, not the Pollards.
Not the Pollards.
See, the Pollards were kind of a tail that joined us. It was the Boyds, Rushes, and Stevensons that for years had been together in Tracy and had come to this decision to move. And the fall, but Mary Pollard I'd known since I was a little girl. We'd grown up in the same friends meeting. And
well, they're nearly a generation older than you, sort of.
Well, Mary's 11 years older than I am, and she was always my big sister I sort of looked up to.
Right.
And George is a distant cousin of mine who's considerably older yet. But they were part of the group that started Pacific Ackworth. They were part of the parents group that started Pacific Ackworth when I was teaching there, and they had continued on in the Pacific Ackworth group. And the fall of the year that the fall of 51, when we were leaving in 52, we got a letter from Mary saying that they were planning to go. They'd heard that we were planning to go to Canada, and they were thinking about going to Canada too. They were thinking about going to Vancouver. Well, that's a whole other, topic. Is the things that we've learned about cooperative groups in a number of different cooperative groups. I mean, this would be a whole other topic that would be really interesting to have, and I'd like to have tapes of that sometime. I thought about putting that together myself, because see, the pollsters were in Bryn-Gwellet. All you have to do is talk to Norman half an hour, and you'll find that out.
Right.
And the Wells were part of a group in the Temple City group, which eventually became Pacific Ackworth group. But they were part of the Temple City group that had a common purse for quite a long time. And that was in California. And I was just a young thing at that. I mean, the Wells are older too. And but the Wells and the Ways and a bunch of other people that were young people when I was in high school and college. They were the young settled people with small families. Jane was a curly-haired little moppet, and that was during World War, pre-World War II and during World War II, and they were into this common purse thing, and it was really a very strong thing, but they learned a lot from that, and they have that background, and I was on the fringe of it, because I was teaching in Pacific Ackworth and I was a young, footloose person, and asking a lot of questions. And then the Boyds were part of the Tracy group for a number of years, and
what's the Tracy group? What do you mean Tracy monthly meeting? Or?
Well, it was more than that. The Boyds moved to Tracy. Bob and Ruth moved to Tracy when Margaret was a baby. I could find the date, but Bruce can give it to you. And with Bob had ministerial training to start with, and then he decided, he didn't want to be in a pulpit. He didn't want to differentiate himself from other people. He didn't feel he was better or more able to minister to other people than others. He wanted to be ministered to and to minister and be part of a group. So he moved to Tracy, and it was in Chicago, because he went to Chicago Theological Seminary, and after some other things happened, they had a stint in Arizona where he was a minister for a year because they had to have finances, and Ruth was sick. And then he did a 6-week tour. He and Ruth decided they wanted to stay in California because that was their heritage. And so he did a 6-week tour, doing something like that. You never have time, and day-by-day things just don't seem important enough to take the time to record them.
So the Boyds were part of this Tracy group? They
were part of the Tracy group because Bob had moved there with the idea of doing, all right, this is the way he used to put it, as I remember. Ruth may say it differently, but that he wanted to spend the 25 years of his adult active life, he figured there'd be 25 of them, seeing what he could do to help bring about good social change in an area which was not so far, where the organizations were not so huge that you had to beat against. Like in Chicago, you had the whole, the government, the city government, and all the rest that you had to work against.
But they all grew up around there.
Yeah, well, it happens, but in Tracy, at least you got to know people, and it was a small town at that time, and it was about 7,000, and so that you could know the mayor and other people and go to people directly.
And the Rushes?
Well, we collected around, the Boyds were there first, and then the Welches moved there, and then we moved there after the war. After World War II, there were a number of people who'd been in conscientious objector camps, including Rush and John Stevenson, who were looking for some place to put roots down because they'd been on a day-to-day basis for so long, never knowing what was going to happen next, and they wanted to put roots down quickly. And so we moved into the Tracy community, and the Rushes moved in a couple of years later.
When you say community, you mean there was one piece of property that you all built on, or one?
Well, no, but the Boyds had been there long enough. They'd established a lot of relationships. They had a lot of things going in terms of on the south side. I'd gone there for 2 summers, helping build up a playground in an area of where there were 800 people and 27 different nationality groups.
This is in Tracy.
This is in the south side of the tracks, the wrong side of the tracks in Tracy. But it was 700 people where you could know the people, and Bob had his home on the outside edge of that piece of property, and those were the people. It was from those people. Then we went and we lived there, on their property with them after the war, because we had no money, nothing. I'd been teaching in Pacific Acworth for considerably smaller salaries than French school salaries are now. And John had been in CPS. And the day that he was released from CPS, we had twins. So we started out our, quote, married life together with twins. And when the twins were about a little over 2 months old, we moved to Tracy and moved in. We borrowed the Boyd's Model A and moved up. But you see, I'd spent 2 previous summers working as a work camp leader at the Boyds.
And there were 4 or 5 families.
Working in the community. The Welches had moved there because they hadn't been involved in the war. They'd moved there before, and Bob had found some Mexican families and Portuguese families that they were very much involved with. So he had started sort of a cooperative.
An economic cooperative?
Well, it was a cooperative. It was called the Southside Improvement Association, which was to try to have a better community on the south side of the tracks. And that was the group that invited me as work camp leader to go there with a work camp group and work under the Southside Improvement Association for the 2 summers that I'd gone and worked there. And we did surveys, and we helped build a playground out of some lots that we got the city to give to the community to make a playground. And so when we moved there, the Boyds had already, done quite a bit of establishing roots, and had built a house and had a chicken house that was available for living in, and that they lived in for a while. And we moved in when they moved out. No, the Welches moved in when they moved out, and we moved in when the Welches moved out. And the Wolfs moved in when we moved out.
And the Wolfs did. So you knew the Wolfs as far back as Tracy.
Yeah.
And the Rushes?
Well, the Rushes had come to Tracy. The Rushes had shopped around after the war for 2 or 3 years, and then they had moved to Tracy. We were pretty well established, and the meeting was a going concern. There wasn't a Friends meeting until we came, but the Boyds had sort of been thinking about it, but hadn't gotten it together. And the Boyds and Welches had both sort of been thinking about wanting a Friends meeting. So when we went there, because I'd been grown up in Friends, and funny when I talk like this, it sounds like I've been a Quaker all my life, and my image of myself is not that I've been a Quaker all my life. This isn't the kind of thing for your tape, but I'd like to say it for you, Peter, and that is that I mean, I don't care, but it doesn't fit into the history of. But but a lot of the time I'm working. I'm a gadfly in the Quaker situation. I'm sorry, that's a digression, but I just wanted to share it with you. This image of how you see yourself. Okay, what else do you want to know?
So there were some roots to your group.
Okay, in Tracy. All right. Now let me finish up Tracy thing, because I had to tell that about the Boyds being there, because that group was the Villalovises and the Boyds and the Stevensons were the 3 families that borrowed $27,000 in about 19. Let's see. Well, it was. All right, I can tell you it was 1946. Because we borrowed $27,000 and bought with that 80 acres of land. And during the year of 46, 47, the women all got pregnant. They were our fertility babies, we called them. And the men were spending, all of them had jobs, but they were earning a livelihood. But all their after work time they were spending on going through the process of planting beans in this, pinto beans in this 80 acres of land, and raising the bean crop, selling the beans, subdividing the property, putting into 2 acre pieces, putting in the road, and making it into the Mountain View Homestead subdivision. Because we had felt, we'd come to feel that in the south side of Tracy there were many, many families that were living with various racial backgrounds, who were living in houses owned by the railway. They were on 25-foot lots, and there just wasn't any hope of those kids growing up having any real association with the soil, and with real family life, because they were so crowded, and the cultural pattern of people in that area was just so sad that we decided that if we could just get 2 acre plots available to the people who wanted to to avail themselves of it, that we would like to live with them in a community situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so we set up this cooperative Mountain View Homestead Association. Horrible name. That was the Portuguese and Mexicans who liked that name.
Mm-hmm.
And we moved out. Stevensons moved out, and the Boyds never did move on to it, but the Rushes built across the road from us.
Mm-hmm.
We moved an old house onto our piece of property. We didn't get any water on our property until about a month before we left.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had water on the property, but we didn't have it in the house. Didn't have a pipe into the house.
Mm-hmm. Did the homestead fill up? Was it a success?
Yeah, very much of a success. It's still in existence, except that it's now become when we didn't stay. Well, one never knows what would have happened. How things would have been different if you'd acted differently, and you have to assume that you did the right thing,
mm-hmm.
or else, you don't know what would happen. But after we left, Clarence Young, who was one of the families that were contemporaries in very close association with Rushes and us, he shot his wife and committed suicide because he'd overextended himself financially and he couldn't face it. And that was very hard on the co-op because they were, living right there. They were the kids our kids all played with, and we were very close. And there were people of Japanese ancestry and black and Mexicans and Portuguese and all the rest of us. And we had set aside a piece of property for a playground, and we had a lot of regulations about weeds and a lot of things like that. Those and regulations about you could only put one family dwelling on 2 acres in order to keep it rural. Well, the blacks, and you can understand it. I mean, but a family would move in with family, and until it's much better than they would have had if they'd stayed in the south side area. We were about 1.5 miles out from the edge of the south side, and it's much better than much better conditions. But they sold the playground after we left, and there's somebody to build a house on, and I've gathered they don't keep up the weed regulations or things like that. And it's just become a neighborhood now, but it's still there, and it is interracial, and it's at least people have 2-acre pieces. So,
Well, when you came here in 1952, you had a group that was called Delta Farmers Club?
No, we came here, the Rushes and Boyds and Stevensons felt that it was right to move. Remember I said we considered Costa Rica, and John and I were ready to move there because we were most free. See, the California Loyalty Oath came. John had been working for a 3-room school. He was, with his BA, people really loved to hire him as a bus driver. And
you mean as a put down because he couldn't get another
job? No. He had a BA in mathematics, and he did not want to teach at that time. He wanted to do something that was physical. He'd been in conscience objector camp, and he worked in a slaughterhouse for a couple of years, just because he felt he shouldn't be eating meat if he wasn't willing to do that part of it. And then he was interested in using his hands, and he worked in a high school as a janitor, and then he got this job in a little rural school where he was, but I'm probably laughing, as school boards like to hire him because they like to be able to say they had a bus driver that had a BA. Anyway, he loved this job, but because of the California Loyalty Oath, the Levering Act and all, and he didn't sign, then he was out of a job. And so Stevensons were most footloose at this point, ready to move. And we had decided, we'd come to the decision, the Rushes and we'd come to the decision, and the Boyds gradually See, they had a lot more investment in Tracy because they had made this decision to go there for 25 years. And to pull up that kind of stakes took a lot more than those of us that had come there with a similar kind of investment, because we'd all come with that too, but still we were a different generation because we'd been through the war. I mean, Bob had a family during the war and wasn't really hurt by it. Whereas those of us that had been younger, we were really a different generation, even though we weren't that much distant in age. For instance, when we were working with the Sons of Freedom, you know, here, it was just fantastic. The difference of the Rushes and Stevensons' ability to identify with a sense of freedom, and the Boyds and Wolfes, who had not been part of the dissident hippie group who'd said no to the government, who said no to the establishment during the war. So when we came knowing that the Boyds and Rushes would be moving up sooner or later. And we were coming as a three-brother family. If I ever find one of the documents, I'll show you what our document, our manifesto to the many friends that we had at that time, telling them why we were making this move. And
yeah, I'd like to see that.
So we came assuming that we were going to work as three brothers who were very close on something in southeastern Canada. Southeastern Canada, because prices were in our price class in terms of land, because we didn't have much money amongst us. And but that was all that we knew. And we had no idea other people would come. We gave up our idea of starting a high school because everybody said, and we accepted it, that nobody would send their kids to some godforsaken place up in Canada.
You had the thought of a high school?
Oh yes, oh yes. We had. In fact, we were part of a group. We were part of a group that for about 3 years had gone through this process of thinking about starting a high school. And after we left, some of the group continued, and it evolved, and it was the group that started John Woolman School. I mean, it was a continuity from the group that we were involved in. And we pulled out and came up here saying, well, we'd have to give up our idea of a high school. But we had the same roots in a group in California as John Woolman. And so when we came, there was no, we had no idea what we were going to do, except that the three families of us were going to try to live. Our big thing was, I think the big thing that we agreed on was that we wanted to try to learn to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and mind, and the neighbor as thyself. And, you know, to understand what that meant. And we came out of a Quaker context, therefore that was the general framework that we were working in. But we had no idea what we'd be doing. And we'd given up the idea of a school. And we knew that the three families of us wanted to work cooperatively. Well, the first summer that we were here, the Wolfes came visiting, and Cal Rainbolt came visiting, Cal and Sam, and then other people started coming the next year. Valentine's started in correspondence with us, and Elliott's, and there were just started to be a bunch of people that were coming from various places. They'd read our manifesto in the Green Revolution, or, I mean, it got published a number of places. Our manifesto.
Elliott's, you said, started communicating with you.
Well, see, when I was, the second summer, I went down to get my permanent BC certification, because I had been teaching the Argenta school for 2 years.
Summer of '53, you went to Vancouver?
It must have been. I'm confused about this, because I'm sure it was 54. But the Elliots came, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to check on this. Maybe I went the second summer, but I think it was the third summer. I'm sure it was the third summer. And maybe it was the second. Anyway, I went down, and while I was down there, Dave Orcutt, who was in part of a cooperative group that had moved up from the States over at Quaker, told me that I really should contact a fellow named Hugh Elliott, who had just returned from China and was going to marry a Victoria lady. I went to Victoria to school, and I should get acquainted with him. That he was an interesting guy, and I should look him up. So I looked him up, and Hugh decided right off the bat that that's where he wanted to live. And, I mean, he really wanted to investigate it. So he and Anna were married, and John always says that Hugh was the first person who came into Argenta hitchhiking John never knew about, hitchhiking from Revelstoke. He came down while I was gone to summer school, the last part of my having gone to summer school. And then Hugh spent the next year, he'd promised Anna to go to, that they would go to Europe for the summer, for the year, for a honeymoon. Because, see, they were quite a bit older. I mean, they were older than we were. And we were in our mid-30s. And so he went with Anna, and he kept writing these letters saying, when I come to Argenta, I'm going to do thus and so, and I'm going to do this and that and the other thing. And we'd write back and say, Hugh, you're married. You better make sure that it's when we come to Argenta. And then the next letter we'd get was, when we come to Argenta, then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do the other thing. And when I get there, I'm going to do this. Then he and Anna arrived, and...
Did they move right? Did they build that place?
No.
No, they just lived somewhere else.
No, they lived in the cabin across the road for a number of years.
Falkirk cabin?
The one where Tom is now. See, Anna, when they arrived here, Anna told me, I'd met her in Victoria, and Anna told me that I didn't need to be worrying about whether they were going to stay or not, that she was sure that Hugh would realize within 2 or 3 weeks, and surely within 6 weeks, he'd realize this wasn't the place for him. He was a city boy, and he just had all these fantasies about living in the country, but it'd wear off, and so we didn't need to be concerned.
It wasn't the case.
That wasn't the case.
But she settled into...
She was a person who, she and Hugh made many compromises. It was tough because she had dreamed when she'd married Hugh because she loved him first. But her idea was that they were going to go to London. See, Hugh'd just come back from China, and that they were just stopping over in Canada, and he was marrying her, and then they were going to go to London. And then she had a beautiful, beautiful voice. And that she would be able to, they would live in a flat in London, and she would be able to join some of the really great choirs in London and see the plays. And, he had enough money so that they could, enough inheritance so they could live comfortably, simply and comfortably. And she could do museums, visit museums. And she'd worked in the Royal Ontario Museum for 7 years, and she'd been a librarian for 7 years. And she was a very quiet, gentle person. But she compromised, and Hugh compromised, and that house that he lives in was Anna's house. The downstairs was his, the shop. And
so they came in 53, 54, 55, 55, then it would have been.
Ask Hugh.
I'm just thinking, we come, as each year passes, you come closer and closer to the present and towards...
Yeah, well, I just don't know. I just don't know whether it was 54 or 55. They arrived. The Pollard's house burned on March the 21st. On the equinox. It was a blizzard, and their house burned. And the Elliots had been here for about 2 weeks at that time. I think they came on March 10th.
Well, when was Delta Farmers Co-op?
Delta Co-op. Delta Co-op.
When was Delta Co-op started officially? When did it choose your name?
Well, see, we came with this idea of the Boyds, Rushes, and Stevensons working together as three family of brothers. And that was going on from the beginning, and we bought the flats with the idea that we'd all move out there.
Did you all buy the flats as co-tenants?
Well, the Boyds were the ones that had money. Rushes and Stevensons didn't have any money, and the Pollards certainly didn't. They bought the 8 acres up the hill. But the Pollards always sort of been a separate entity anyway, so that they weren't part of the initial thing, but they very quickly became so because when they first moved here, they weren't even sure they wanted to stay here. They were just coming because we were coming, and they moved up with us to have company to come with. And it'd be interesting to see how nearly my story jives with Mary's on this.
So it was Boyd's that bought the
so the Boyds had their names on that. We had our name after we bought this property because we decided it would be good industrial property for the 3 families. And then the Rushes came up a year later, and they settled into the Coleman place without a place. And there was always going to be, the idea amongst the 3 families was that we would eventually have the Rushes move out next onto the flats because they didn't have a home, and that then the Stevensons would move out next. But we never had money enough to be able to pay the Rushes very much. See, my salary, as soon as the Rushes came up on the basis that my salary would support the 2 families of us, and we had a common purse, which was a very strong and good period. In fact, it was so strong and good in terms of the 2 families of us who were very, very different in personality, extremely different. Were you around when Ann Rush was here last time? John and Ann. I don't know whether you got well enough acquainted with them to realize how different Ann Rush and John are. John Stevenson are just. John is calculating, mathematical, and Ann is, she's a poet. She's a feeling person, very much a feeling person. And one of the great victories, as far as I was concerned, was coming home from school one day, and here was John Stevenson and Ann Rush canning chickens together. They'd been doing it all day long in our kitchen in the hotel, with all the kids busily working together, and for John and Ann to be working in a really compatible working situation where Ann was at that time pretty disorganized, and John was so much on organization that it was just fantastic. I figured, this cooperative thing, this really working together does have tremendous meaning. So we were working together, the 3 families, but we decided that if the Pollards were going to stay, that they had to have an economic base. And it wasn't just the Pollards. We were, all of us, beginning to feel that way, but the Pollards were the immediate need because they didn't have any money.